I'm a female, and this happened when I was 13 years old, so I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write, classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates whose phone numbers I had and around one or two I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning, so everything fell into place. Once my parents left around 8-ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they engraved into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. The night drew on and on. I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often, I would look over my shoulder, and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold, and it was nearly pitch black with a few streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large wide field with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning that they went the opposite way of the road since that's where the parking lot was. The man continued standing by the right side of the forest, which was also by the exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably in his early 40s or late 30s, with dark hair and a beard. He was probably around 5'9", but at the time it seemed like he was 6 foot. He was standing about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started just to quickly walk through the woods to get to the road. Suddenly, I heard a snap and a crunch behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying to not be suspicious, but it only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I had reached my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away. I ran faster than I've ever ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards, and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me, and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and burst through it, shoving it closed behind me as I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights, and hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he got in. Luckily, he didn't. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end, but it doesn't. After a few months, I hadn't really told anyone what happened about that night since I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on the bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. It was the guy who stalked me. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the police if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It still haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position, or or even dead. This story took place several years ago when I was in 7th or 8th grade. My school, like most others in the area, would allow the 7th and 8th graders to go out for lunch on Fridays. That is, provided you brought in a note from your parents that morning allowing you to do so. We would have an hour from 12:45 to 1:45 to leave school property to grab some food nearby and roam around the neighborhood. So, this was one of those Fridays. It was probably spring, because I remember it being a pleasant temperature outside. Myself and 2 other girlfriends had decided to walk to the local grocer and get Chinese food from the hot table. Once we got our food, we decided to sit in a park we frequented that was about halfway between the school and the grocery store. It had one of those colored metal and plastic play structures designed to look kind of like a treehouse. We set ourselves up to eat in the play structure on the platform under the green plastic foliage of the treehouse. It was a pretty big park, with a wood chip play structure and swing set area, along with a baseball diamond and some picnic tables in between the two. The rest of the park was a big open field with an incline on one side leading to the fenced backyards of a row of houses. The opposite side of the park was bordered by a small creek. There were 2 streets bordering the other 2 parallel ends of the park. Before the creek was a walking path, and then a strip of grass with benches and garbage cans placed on it periodically throughout the park, then the small creek. It was quite a shallow creek, probably only half a foot to a foot deep. The creek was bordered on either side with a thin layer of skinny little trees and other brush, but you could still partially see through to the other side. If you crossed through the creek from the park, you would end up in the parking lot of an abandoned hotel. The hotel was of course on the other side of the lot. It had been abandoned maybe 5 to 10 years before this. It was the only hotel in our town, and I guess our smallish town didn't get too many visitors because the whole building was just abandoned one day. The hotel is probably 4 or 5 stories tall, and the windows were all boarded up. Apparently everything inside the hotel was just left the way it was too. I had heard that lots of homeless people now took shelter in the abandoned hotel. Additionally, the creek ran under one of the bordering roads, creating a super creepy, very heavily graffiti tunnel underneath. It was a decently long concrete tunnel that was big enough that we could stand up in at 12 years old, but it would probably require anyone much taller to crouch a little. So, back to this day. We were sitting on the play structure eating our Chinese food and sharing from a big family-sized bottle of Sunny D, as we didn't have enough money to each get drinks separately. Everything was going fine, until we saw an elderly woman come out of the creek and through the brush, heading in our direction. Now, this was one of those classic-looking grandmas with a walker, so we were immediately really weirded out, wondering how she could have possibly gotten into the creek with a walker. However, we started to get concerned when she walked past the pathway through the park, heading towards us instead of turning either way and leaving the park. Like I said, this was a very stereotypical looking old woman. She walked hunched over with her walker, moving quite slowly. She had gray curly hair and a scarf tied around her face. She was wearing big sunglasses as well, so a lot of her face was covered up. She was also wearing several layers of typical old lady clothing, looking quite bundled up given the season. She was still heading towards us, and eventually came up to the side of the play structure. She stopped right in front of the ladder of about 3 or 4 steps that would lead you from the ground to the platform we were sitting on. Once again, it was kind of odd as she needed assistance walking, so she would most definitely not be able to climb up a ladder. She was very close to us now, close enough that we couldn't even whisper between the 3 of us girls because she would be able to hear it, but because she was so close, I got a much better look at her. After standing there for a few seconds, she smiled at us. Definitely a creepy smile, but that wasn't even what struck me as odd. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it wasn't an old woman's smile. The teeth were perfect. Not perfect enough to be dentures or veneers, but they looked like perfect, young, gently used teeth. I realized that I really couldn't see much else of her face. The scarf and the sunglasses really covered her up. But like I said, the parts you could see did not look how you'd expect. The cogs in my brain turned, and the stereotypical old lady look made sense. There was absolutely no one else in this entire park. We were alone with this creepy old lady. It's also worth noting that none of us had phones yet. Luckily, this was the age of the iPod Touch. Somehow, one of my friend's dads saved us in the nick of time. Her dad had called her just at the right second. He said he was around the corner just about here to pick us up, and my friend repeated the message out loud. As she said this, the old lady stood up straight, picked up the walker, and ran out of the park. This hunched over lady, barely able to walk, just straightened up into a tall person who just picked up and sprinted away with urgency. no longer hunchbacked and no longer needing the walker, but ran away as a completely different person who, mind you, ran quite fast with ease. It was not someone that was struggling to run. But wait a minute, you couldn't call people on an iPod unless you had Wi-Fi, which we most certainly did not have in the middle of the park. My friend explained that what she did was go to the settings app on her iPod Touch, go to the sound settings where you could slide the volume of the ringer up or down, and it would play a ringtone at that volume out loud. She did this so subtly that we all really thought her dad called her for a minute. She pretended that the ringing was her dad calling her on her phone, and made up the idea that he was just about to be there to pick us up. So yeah, this was basically someone who either walked through the creek from the hotel, or even came through from under the bridge. They wanted us to see them as an innocent old woman, not being immediately startled when they began heading our way. Who knows what they would have done next, or what they were planning to do, but I am very glad we never found out. My friends and I all agree that this person was definitely a man due to the height, as well as the general cadence of this person. There was no chance that this was actually an old woman. It became so obvious that it was a disguise. A man disguised as an elderly woman, preying on unassuming 12-year-old girls. Who knows what his intentions were? I am quite a loner and like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one night on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. There was something eerie this time though, as I had a feeling that the 27th of November is a night that something grotesque was going to happen, and boy was I right. So, at around 2 a.m., I was restless and made my way into the cold night with that same feeling of dread I had had earlier on in that day. The first hour of my walk was pretty normal and nothing out of the ordinary, but lo and behold, I had a feeling I was being watched. Bearing in mind that it was about 3 a.m. now and I was sitting on a bench in a park that wasn't very well lit. Someone else being in the park was very unlikely, as it's a small town and the only people who would be around at this time are drunks. Anyways, there was no sound coming from the dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing there staring in my direction. I looked down at my phone to put my torchlight on and pointed my light towards the dark figure, but to my surprise, he had vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back in my pocket and lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my house but still had this uneasy feeling of someone watching me. I am normally not easily scared, but this felt different, like someone had decided to taunt me. I looked behind me to see the same dark-figured man standing right beside a tree just looking my way. Now, I know this isn't just something my mind had made up. I shouted to the figure, "Hey man, is there a problem?" You could tell there was fear in my voice, but I wasn't going to let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. This was just getting weird now. I stood there, and my eyes widened. The man got to the ground and started crawling towards me in a manner I could only describe as insane. The only thing I could hear was this hissing noise, which I presume was coming from him. I just stood there wondering what on earth he was going to do to me, but in my current state, I just looked at him with fear. As he edged closer, I vaguely noticed something was dangling from his backpack. I guessed that it was some bird or some sort of small creature. Anyway, I didn't want to hang around to find out, so I dashed up a small lane back to my house. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I shouldn't have headed straight back to my house, as he would know where I lived, but my head was in a messed up place from all the fear this man had caused me. I ran through my gate, to my front door, and quickly glanced behind me to find him just standing outside my closed gate. One thing the man said to me will always send chills down my spine to this day. He muttered the words, "One day we will meet again, and this time you will be coming home with me." The events of that night stopped me from going on walks because I still, even to this day, fear that he will come back and take me to some sinister place where he could do whatever the hell he wants to me. One time I went to the bar with one of my friends. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to too many bars up to that point. My friend was drinking on the way to the bar, so he was already pretty drunk when we got there. When I sat at the bar, a cute girl came over and talked to me and my friend. She said her name was Candace, and I noticed she had really bright red hair. I assumed she dyed it. It was pretty, but unnatural. Anyways, this girl was flirting with me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk. To be honest, I played along like I was drunk already too, since it seemed to be working for my friend. I don't know if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. Then she offered to buy us drinks. She kept buying us more and more, and I started to get confused as to who she liked between me and my friend. My friend went to the bathroom. Before he came back, he was kicked out by the bouncers. He was too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him. She kept telling him to go home with her. He was so out of it he could barely answer her. I told her that he was way too drunk and that I couldn't let him go anywhere. I didn't want him to wake up hungover in some random house with no car, no idea what happened. Candace kept pushing it, saying that she would take care of him, but I told her no because I had to stay with him. I was more sober than him. He was my responsibility. I told her the only way he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. I assumed she thought I was jealous, but my friend could barely stand and lost interest in Candace already at that point. She immediately started flirting with me and offered to get my friend a taxi to drive him home and said we could go back to her place alone. At this point, I had a few drinks and was pretty buzzed, so I agreed. We took my friend to the taxi and walked to her car. I slightly stumbled on the way to her car. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said, smiling as she held onto my arm. I don't know why, but I just felt slightly shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easy for me, so I felt uneasy. Anyways, we got in her car and drove down the street. "Want to stop at the liquor store and get some more to drink? I'll buy it, so don't worry about paying," she offered. I didn't want to drink any more than I already did. I was already buzzed and wanted to be able to carry myself throughout the rest of the night. Sometimes I make myself look stupid when I'm drunk, so I didn't want to ruin anything with Candace more than I already did earlier by telling her my friend was too drunk. I told her I was already drunk enough, but she insisted. I didn't want to seem lame, so I told her to get me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went in the store and came out with a lot more than just a pint. I assumed she wanted to drink more also, and that's why she got a fifth instead of a pint. On the car ride, we passed the bottle back and forth, but she took tiny sips. I tried to take tiny sips, but she kept passing me the bottle and telling me to drink. I somehow managed to drink all my apple juice, and pretend to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor into the apple juice bottle. I tossed the apple juice bottle full of liquor out the window before she saw it. I didn't want her to know I was acting drunker than I was. She actually believed I was sloppy drunk when I was simply buzzed. I took a couple more sips of liquor and finished the bottle. Throughout the car ride, I called her the wrong name a couple of times to get a reaction out of her. She didn't react to it. She just kept letting me call her Carla without correcting me. For some reason, I thought she lied to me about her name initially. We drove up to her house. I pretended to trip and stumbled into her front door. She helped me walk inside by holding me up. She opened the front door, which was unlocked. We walked in her house. She closed her front door and then locked it. I thought that was strange, but assumed she didn't want anyone walking in on us. I told her that I had to use the bathroom. I walked into her bathroom, locked the door, and looked in the mirror. I just felt strange. I felt like something was off. I felt myself becoming more drunk from finishing the bottle earlier. I turned on the sink to make noise and made myself puke up the liquor I drank. I flushed and went to the sink and started drinking the tap water out of my hands to sober up. I just didn't want to be drunk, but I still wanted my chance with Candace, so I wanted to pretend to be drunk. I turned the sink off, and I could hear her talking to someone. "He's drunk as hell. He can barely stand up. You do it." Who was she talking to? And do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. The moment I stepped into the living room, I saw her walking into another room. All I could see was the back of her head, that strange, very bright red hair go into another room. I didn't see her face or anything. I just saw her kind of walk fast into the room. The living room was pretty dark. "Hey, where you going?" I slurred like I was drunk. She walked back into the dark living room and up to me. "Let's go in my room," she said. I looked at her bright red hair and then into her eyes. They were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. That's when I realized. It was another girl with the same wig on. It was a wig the whole time. She had changed it with the girl from earlier for whatever reason. My heart felt like it stopped, but I tried to look like I had no idea it was a different girl. I kind of smiled at her and told her I just needed to use the bathroom one more time and told her sorry I was so drunk. She said, "It's fine, just hurry up there." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I heard her whisper something to someone again. This time I think I heard a male voice whisper back. I honestly didn't concentrate on listening to exactly what she said. Something sketchy was going on, and I had to get out of that house. I opened the bathroom window and jumped straight out of it, and ran faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't look behind myself or anything. I just ran through the backyard, jumped the fence, ran through someone else's yard, hit a road, and ran toward the main road. I kept running down the main road until I saw a 24-hour convenience store. I ran into the store and stood at the front in front of the camera. I called a taxi and went home. I tried to think about what happened that night. What was she, or they, planning that night? Why did she tell me a fake name? Why was she trying to get my friend and I so drunk? I thought maybe it was just a robbery, but she kept spending money on us. She kept buying us drinks and even paid for my friend's taxi cab. And mostly, why did she wear a wig that she gave to another girl to wear? Who was she talking to? What did it mean? And what was in that room they tried to lure me into? The next day after this incident, I went back to the house with a couple of friends just to see what was going on. Nobody was there. No cars, no people, nothing. Just an empty house. I ended up finding out that that house was a summer rental, and whoever those people were, they broke into that house and used it only for that night and never came back. I was about 7 years old and my brother was about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us three at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left puts you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bedroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened up to our back porch. My brother and mom had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. "I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway." I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise, because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave when they showed up. Tall, white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out, he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. So about 12 years ago when I was 9 years old, I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there since we were too young to be home alone. We got up at 10:30 a.m. I took a shower, then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone who knocked at our door turned out to be salesmen or Jehovah's Witnesses, we kind of waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, and no one was there. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it look blurry. We waited and saw in case it was just a bird flying by, when a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared and didn't know what to do. My brother had a cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs until the perpetrator finally bashed open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said as he was whispering. His voice could be barely heard. "Hello, there is someone in our house. I think they're stealing." Then a pause. "We are at..." Then he gave him our address. Another pause. "I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry." During all of that, I was sitting against the wall, hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets, even breaking a few cups and plates. Then I heard the sound my cell phone does when it turns off, and I remember leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple minutes, when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod we had lying there. He started kicking the door. "Who's there?" the man screamed. We said nothing. Another kick, then another. I felt I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache. I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that, he stopped. We heard the door opening, and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess, lots of paper and books on the floor. The cabinets were open, with cups and plates on the floor. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were open, and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs, in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom, and she ordered us to go to my aunt's as soon as possible, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 p.m. My mom told her boss she had a home emergency, so she left early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciate her effort and my aunt's to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. The police got home after she arrived at 3 p.m., 4 hours after the incident. She explained everything, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next days my mom was home with us. Now I tell this story as a funny anecdote. Luckily no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff, but at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that. I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned on to it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt a conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on the PlayStation. We all hung out at the park, went swimming, and overall had a good time hanging out. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself don't exist anymore. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. Imagine what that does to a person when they're smoking it 30 plus times in a day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently he had hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom even when he wasn't smoking DMT. Of course I was very alarmed to hear all this, and I told him he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months so he can find solid footing in reality again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help, and like I said before, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family. so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk to him into getting some psychiatric help because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she is at least 6 years younger than us and probably didn't grasp how serious this situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things started to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad, and we went anyway. We went to the park and he was his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made up gods that only he knew the truth about and so on. He also had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on the walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic, and that it helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me or my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with this ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, why do you think I want to spend any more time with this nut?" But it must not have been very effective, or my boyfriend was ignoring it, not sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. In the car I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we were heading through a busy part of town where all the shopping and restaurants were, I heard the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. I peeked out of the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. He was watching adult videos on his phone, all while doing something highly inappropriate, as I'm sure you can all guess. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach, and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped up into my head. I was trying not to shake, and trying to ignore it and drive through heavy traffic. I kind of had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge pocket knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. This part is nuts, but my boyfriend didn't seem to notice, and the whole time he kept rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving and trying to act like I didn't know what was going on in the back seat. We got to the restaurant and my boyfriend ran inside to grab the food. I was left alone in the car with our friend, and I tried to act like I was browsing on my phone when I was really watching and listening as hard as I could. We didn't talk. My boyfriend got back, and I complained that I was tired, saying that it's been a long day and we should drop him off. So, I drove us back to our friend's car, and he didn't get out of our vehicle. He just sat there. I had to get a little bit rude and asked him to please get out and go home. He got out of our car and walked over to his passenger side. I started getting really scared, and I suspected the worst. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat, and he just walked over to our car with it. I don't know why the hell I did this, but I was so pissed I just got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything during this entire time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I obviously told my boyfriend we are never hanging out with him again and that I didn't even want to talk to him anymore. No contact, nothing. A few months passed, and he'd occasionally message me through the PlayStation or text my phone. He said a lot of random stuff, and I just ignored it. It turns out, he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate, and I think their girlfriend lived there, but I'm not really sure about the situation. I thought maybe he was turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I thought it was best to cut all contact and let him regroup. I was not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needed help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I got a call around 11 p.m. one night that woke me up. It was a man claiming to be a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skipped a beat. I started sweating and immediately asked what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. This story begins when I was in 4th grade, so I was about 9, as I was a bit young for my grade. Because of me being younger than the other kids, I didn't get along with them very well. So, whenever we would go out to recess, I would make sure to bring whatever book I was reading at the time. I had my own special place I liked to sit and read. It was a little corner of the playground where barely anybody went. It was a large patch of clovers and other overgrown plants, and had a large bush with a gap between it and the fence. I used to love to sit there. One day, I went over to my normal spot and sat with my back facing the bush. I had been reading for a while when I thought I heard a rustling sound behind me. Sometimes squirrels and chipmunks would hang out in the gap between the bush and the fence, so I didn't think much of it. That was until I heard heavy breathing and something tugging on my pigtails. Surprised, I whipped my head around, thinking my hair had gotten caught on a branch or something, but instead, there was a boy. He was sitting hunched in the gap between the fence and the bush, leaning forward between the branches with his face mostly obscured by leaves and his arm outstretched, trying to grab at my hair. I screamed and bolted for the picnic table area where the supervising teachers were. I was very shy back then, so I didn't say anything. Instead, for a long time after that, I sat and read by the teachers during recess. About 3/4 of the way through the school year, I made a friend who we'll call Matt. Matt was also a bit of an outcast, and when we got assigned to be in a reading group together, we became best friends. He was nice enough, but even my 9-year-old self could tell there was something off about him. He was way too clingy, barely ever leaving my side, and constantly coming up with excuses to touch me. I, of course, didn't have any other friends then, so I ignored it. However, one day, he told me that he liked me. I had no idea how to react to this and just said nothing. He apparently took my silence as a yes, because he called my home phone later that night. My mom handed me the phone, saying that a friend was asking to talk to me. Since my parents were watching TV downstairs, I decided to go up to my room so I wouldn't bother them. It was Matt. I could barely even say hello before he started saying some seriously weird stuff. He started saying things like, "What do you want to name our kids? When we get to high school, let's run away and start a family. I bet you look really cute when you're asleep." Now, this would be creepy for anyone, but I was 9. I had no idea how to handle the situation, so I just stayed away from him. He was not happy about this, constantly glaring at me and just being all around super creepy. A year later, I was halfway through 5th grade and had a serious bully problem, but that's a story for another day. It got so bad that my dad decided one day to not wait until the next school year and instead switch schools the following Monday. 5th grade at my new school was great, and starting in 6th grade, my parents got me my first phone. Of course, I called up Clara, who became my friend after the Matt incident, and let her know about my new phone. A couple more months passed, and one night, I got a call from an unknown number. Picking up the phone, I froze when I heard Matt's voice. I still vividly remember what he said. "Hey baby, I missed you so much. Why'd you leave me?" Not even a second after he said that, I hung up, blocked his number, and called up Clara, as she was the only person at my school who had my number. Apparently, after school, he had asked to see her phone to call his mom, as he had forgotten his at home. She handed it over to him, as she was a very kind but quite gullible girl. Soon, she noticed that he was taking a while, and that he had out a pen he was writing something on his arm. She yanked her phone away and he panicked, sprinting off. Looking down at her phone, she saw that he had opened my contact info. I was freaked out, but felt safe as I had blocked his number. That didn't stop him though. He would call me every single week from a different phone, leaving at least 10 messages each time. Every time I would block one number, he'd somehow call from another one. When I got a new phone, the calls stopped and I forgot about it, until freshman year. At my high school, there were a couple kids from my old school, and I suddenly remembered Matt. I asked one of the boys, Harry, if he knew what happened to Matt. According to Harry, he got expelled. Teachers had caught him smelling and touching girls' hair, groping female students, trying to sneak into the girls' locker room, and writing extremely explicit content about himself and other girls in the grade, as well as a few other things that I can't remember. The realization hit me like a semi-truck. Smelling and touching girls' hair. The boy hiding in the bush when I was in 4th grade. This happened when I was 5 and my best friend was 6. I'm going to give a quick layout of my school. The building was L-shaped. The short end was not in use at the moment, and cars would stop to the right of the L or behind the short part. The road was pretty much in a square around the school, but only in the aforementioned places cars could pull over. We were at school one day, and my friend did something that made me angry. She grabbed my colorful pens without asking. I wanted revenge. Shortly after, recess started, and about halfway through, I saw my best friend walking towards the back of the short building, and I followed her thinking she was going to do something fun. When I rounded the corner, I saw a man in a car giving her candy through the open passenger door. Well, trying to. My childish mind thought, why doesn't that guy just step out to give her the candy? Now he's holding it just outside her reach, and she has to climb in the car to grab it, and his seat will get all dirty. My friend had one knee on the car seat, reaching for the candy now. I suddenly realized that this was the perfect time for my revenge. I'd stop her from getting candy from this man, so I yelled at her that she wasn't allowed to be this close and I'd tell on her. This caused her to jolt back and she ran away from the car, back to the school ground, taunting me with the fact that a passerby thought she was so pretty that he wanted to give her candy but not me. Apparently, a teacher saw me walk towards the road and was on her way to fetch me, so she was just around the corner from us when my friend started taunting me. She heard what was said and quickly ran the last few steps toward us, frantically asking us, "Did anyone get in a car? Did you see any classmates getting into a car?" She was clearly panicking and the car was long gone by now, having driven off when I yelled at my friend. My friend answered, no, the nice man just wanted to give me candy, and that I'd tell on her, so we ran back. The teacher escorted us inside, had all the other teachers count heads, and talked to the police that were called. Neither me nor my friend knew what was wrong at the time, until her parents came to fetch her and gave her a stern talking to about accepting candy from strangers, saying things like, "We've talked about this," and "We have plenty of candy back home." My mom was proud of me because she thought I listened to the stranger danger talks and protected my friend, and I didn't correct her. A few years ago, my best friend and I were talking about our old school and this day came up. We both just realized that if I hadn't been so obsessed with those pens, or if she had asked before taking them, that she could have been kidnapped and suffered a pretty bad fate. She couldn't believe how stupid she was for thinking that a random guy would really offer candy to kids from his car, especially since her parents had warned her about strangers before. I just felt embarrassed for not recognizing the situation from the talks my parents gave me and being so focused on getting revenge. It took me a while longer to fully realize what could have happened to her. I don't know if the guy was ever arrested or did anything else, and after this incident my school started permanently posting a teacher's lookout near the road. As far as I know, there were no more incidents at that school, and it was never really spoken of again. The official reason for the lookout teacher was to prevent students from running out onto the road and getting run over. When I drove past last year, they had put a fence all around the school. I'm guessing it's because they finally realized a fence is cheaper than paying a teacher an hour a day to just stand around. This happened 3 nights ago, and I'm still going crazy trying to figure it out. I just moved into a new apartment 1 month ago, and I'm still unpacking and settling in. I have been using my parents' address as my mailing address all my life, who live a few towns over. 3 nights ago, my parents called me at 2 a.m. totally freaked out, and proceeded to tell me this story. Apparently, at 1 a.m., someone started banging on their front door and repeatedly ringing their doorbell. My stepdad walked downstairs and opened the door, leaving the front glass door closed and locked. There was a man standing outside who looked to be in his 30s, with a black hoodie on with the hood pulled up around his face. He didn't have any distinguishing facial features, facial hair, or tattoos. The only thing my stepdad said was that he looked to be Hispanic. Neither my stepdad or my mother, who was watching the whole thing out a window, recognized the man. The man said, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for..." He proceeded to give them my full name. My stepdad played dumb and said, "Who?" The man proceeded to state my full name again and said that my boyfriend was worried because I didn't come home that night. He claimed to be a friend of my boyfriend and told my stepdad that they are both out looking for me, worried because I didn't show up at home. I don't have a boyfriend. I live by myself with my 3 dogs and haven't been in a relationship in the past 6 months. Here's the weird part. My stepdad asked the guy what boyfriend he was talking about, and the man told him the name of the boyfriend I had when I was in 10th grade, nearly 20 years ago. My boyfriend in 10th grade has a very unique Italian name, and I've never met anyone with a full name even close to his. He said my high school boyfriend's name a few more times to ensure my stepdad heard him, and repeated that they are very worried about me, asking my stepdad if he was sure I wasn't inside. At this point, my stepdad was weirded out, so he closed and locked the door in his face. The man did not leave. He lingered in front of my parents' house for the next 10 minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking on the phone. Finally, my parents called the cops. About 5 minutes before the cops arrived, the man walked down to the dead end of their block and drove away in a silver car. My stepdad was unable to get the license plate. My parents filed a police report and nothing else happened. After I heard the story, I was going nuts over the weird details. How would someone know who I dated nearly 20 years ago, and what would the motive be of making up a story that included the weird detail about my past? I have not had contact with my 10th grade boyfriend in over a decade. Yesterday, I decided to message him on Facebook to see if he had any insight. I told him the whole story. He was just as confused as I am, and claimed to have no part in it. I am at a loss. I'm also really freaked out that some strange man is going through that much trouble at 1 a.m. to look for me. This was the first and only time I've ever used my emergency code with my mom. My dad was in a band, and some of his band members were in a country band that had a performance on the 4th of July. It was taking place on a ranch-type area near a highway. When I got there, I quickly realized that everyone there was either 20 years older than me or 10 years younger. I was 17 at the time, so I realized I was most likely going to be there bored for the next 3 hours. One of the band members' wives brought over a girl who looked to be my age. She introduced her to me and treated her like a friend. The girl, who we'll call Sarah, started talking with me and asked if I would like to go for a walk around the field. I agreed and we set off. We started talking about school, and it turns out she was a year younger than me and she was homeschooled. I told her that I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and she started talking about how she thought most girls were pretty mean, and that she was Catholic too, but she practiced witchcraft. I thought it was kind of weird, but I tried to be open-minded, so I wasn't judging her. We finally got to the side of the field that couldn't be seen by the people of the event, but it was right next to the highway. There, we came across the body of a dead deer. She looked at me and said, "I really wish I could take its hoof. I wonder if I have any bags on me." I thought she was joking, but she reached into her backpack and pulled out a knife in a brown paper bag. She went over to the dead deer and started sawing at its foot, but she couldn't get it all the way through. She tried to get me to help her, but I said no, so she put down the knife and ripped the hoof off with her bare hands. At this point, I was freaking out because she had just been talking about how she liked violence and didn't really care about people being hurt. She grabbed the hoof and then put it in her backpack. She was still carrying the knife. I tried texting my mom, but there was no service where we were standing. We kept walking, and she was talking about how she would put curses on people she didn't like, and how she was completely desensitized to death and the killing of animals because she had grown up on a farm where she watched her mother cut the heads off of rabbits. We kept walking and came across a fork in the road, and she said we should go one way. Then she told me she wasn't going to chop me into pieces or anything, because that doesn't happen much these days. We finally got to a place where there was cell service, and I texted my mom our code word. She told me to get back to the barbecue and we'd leave right away. Sarah asked me why I had to leave, and I told her that whenever my grandma got to our house, we would have to go home and meet her. I mentioned something about her bringing her dog named Buddy, and Sarah got excited about the name. She said she had a dog named Buddy too, who she set free in the wild, and he was then eaten alive by coyotes, but it was okay because he died happy. We finally got back to where everyone else was, and my mom said that we needed to go home. Sarah then asked for my phone number as she had seen my phone. I agreed and put in a fake number before my parents were ready, and I walked away. As soon as we were out of her sight, I ran to the car. My parents got in the car and asked me if she had pulled out drugs or something. I wish. I would have known how to handle that. In September of 2002, my wife was in her 7th month of pregnancy with our first child. We lived in Ohio at the time and she wanted a baby shower. Since most of her family and close friends lived in Baltimore, Maryland, we planned that we would travel to Baltimore and have the baby shower there on Saturday, October 19th, 2002. But October 3rd and 4th brought the horrifying realization that a serial killer was on the loose in the Baltimore, D.C. area. We naturally re-examined our plans, but decided to go through with them all the same. After all, the likelihood of being the sniper's victim was practically zero from a statistical point of view. My wife and I listened to the news of the Beltway sniper in the days leading up to our trip. It was getting a bit more scary as the death count raised to 9 and there were 2 additional people who had been wounded. In the 11th hour, we decided we would still go, but we would take the PA Turnpike over to I-70 and then I-70 through Hagerstown, Maryland, then Frederick, Maryland, and into Baltimore. Around 5 p.m. on Friday, October 18th, 2002, my wife and I picked up my mom and my stepsister, and we set out for Baltimore. The trip was going slowly, but was otherwise uneventful. We had used the time to review the plans of what to do when we needed to stop during our trip out. The plan was that we all go together, we don't dilly-dally, we get out of the car and into a building quickly, and vice versa, and no one stays in the car alone. Well, eventually, around 12:45 a.m. on Saturday morning, we all needed a restroom break. We pulled off into a rest stop near Frederick and parked right in front of the door to the bathroom facility. The rest area was largely empty, but there was a dark blue, late model, 4-door sedan parked head-in facing the door to the restroom. I parked next to it, and we all quickly reviewed the rules. If I finished first, I would wait for them, and we would all return to the car together. We then got out and raced to the restrooms. As I ran into the restroom area, I didn't pay much attention to the car we parked next to, other than to make sure they didn't open their doors. The night was crisp and full of moisture. I finished first, so I stood out by the exit but stayed inside the building. The doors and walls were all glass, so I nervously scanned the parking lot for anything off-looking. Satisfied that there was nothing ominous in the parking lot, I turned my attention to the blue sedan. I travel a lot, so I naturally took note that their license plate was from New Jersey. In the front seat were 2 males. The one behind the steering wheel was middle-aged. He was awake and staring back at me. Next to him was a sleeping teenager. I remember feeling a chill go down my spine as I watched him watching me. At this time, the authorities hadn't released information on the snipers, and they didn't know of the ominous role the car played in their killing spree, so I was ignorant of the danger these 2 really presented. A few minutes passed before my family returned, and we all ran back to the car. In a flash, we sped away and continued on to our destination. I remember noticing something weird about their trunk. My family was poor growing up, so we sometimes had to pop out a broken lock and couldn't afford to fix it right away, so we would rig the trunk to open using a screwdriver. I remember thinking that's what they must have done with their trunk. It turns out that it was the hole they shot through while staying concealed. The baby shower went well and my wife had fun. We did not go out for meals, but slept and ate at her mom's house in Baltimore. On Sunday morning, it was time to go. We took a much more northern route going home, just to be safe. About a week or so later, once they captured the Beltway snipers, you can imagine the renewed chills running down my spine when in the newspaper, the face of the man that had been staring at me when we stopped to pee at the rest stop, John Allen Muhammad, was staring back at me again. There was also a photo of the car we had parked next to, and even scarier, the report stated that they had been captured in the exact same rest stop where we had parked next to them about a week earlier. I can only assume that the teenage boy that had been asleep next to him was Lee Boyd Malvo. Fortunately, they were both in the front seat, and this was where they had planned to hide out and sleep, so they wouldn't likely have killed us at this rest stop. Therefore, I feel like we weren't in immediate danger. Had it been somewhere else, though, things could have been much worse. I'm not conventionally pretty, nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I'm really plain, and it's always me that had to be on the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar, almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there, I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot, sipping on my drink, while working on a new pendant I was making. I didn't think anyone would try to talk to me since I knew I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me slight attention and are nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him and struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how it started, but he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal and all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. I had drunk 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went into the bathroom. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working, since none of my stuff had been touched. I called over a waitress and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded as it had always been ingrained to me that you never leave your drink unattended, and if you do, you just have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why it was his business if I did. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I told him again that it was my business and that if he didn't like it, he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress over by letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked, then a bit angry before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy that I was talking to, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and just bring me water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after, and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today what exactly happened. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and it started a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently, he was trying to see if he could get someone like me who always had her guard down for herself because my confidence was low. He thought I'd be an easy mark with just a little attention, but when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he had to try on another girl. When I was 19, I really got into clubbing. I went almost every other day. My younger friend, who I had known in high school, was turning 18. On Wednesday, she asked me to take her since I was already well versed in the club scene at this point and knew how to stay safe and have fun. The bar we went to just so happened to be my favorite bar's throwback night. They played 1990s to 2000s movies, and it always attracted a ton of people because the drinks were cheap and the music was good. When I met up with my friend, we drove to the bar about an hour earlier than we intended to go in so we could sit in my car and drink. We had a good time, and I had a few seltzers since I had to drive us home and be sober in 3 hours. While we were sitting in my car, which was parked across the street from the bar, I told her I had a few rules for a safe clubbing experience. Number 1, no taking drinks from strangers. Number 2, no going to the bathroom alone, as I've noticed creepy men always target girls who are alone. And number 3, neither of us were going to go home with anybody. We went in and had a good time. I met up with a guy I had recently been seeing. We danced and talked to people, and she had a few drinks. Once it hit 2 a.m., they started closing and kicked everyone out. She started talking to a guy she met at the bar, got his number, and we started to leave. As we were walking towards the crosswalk, a man started walking behind us and tried to talk to my friend who was visibly drunk. I turned around and told him to leave us alone because she had just turned 18, and he looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s and also not drunk. He kept talking to my friend, and she continued entertaining him. He followed us back to my car and then began to ask us for a ride. I told him no, and he continued to beg, and even began to tell me he'll pay me. I told him to just pay for an Uber and leave us alone. He still didn't leave and kept pestering me. At this point, I wanted to leave because he was creeping me out and even started creeping out my friend. I unlocked the driver's side door and put my stuff in while still telling him to leave. I unlocked the passenger door, which unlocks all the doors, and I told my friend to get in the car. He then proceeded to completely change his demeanor and said, "Oh, thanks," and got in my back seat. I started screaming at him, telling him to get out of my car, and he steadfastly refused and even started becoming aggressive. At this point, I wanted to call the cops, so I asked my friend for her phone since mine was on the fritz and not letting me make calls, and she told me that her phone wasn't working either. I started glancing around to see if I could spot a police officer anywhere, since we were across the street from the police station. There was not one in sight. I started panicking. Then I saw the guy that I met up with that night getting into his Uber. I ran over to him quickly and told him there was a man in my car who wouldn't get out and that our phones weren't working. He told his friends in the Uber to wait for him and walked back to my car with me. He started yelling at the man to get out of my car, and the man started yelling back while threatening to beat him up. He eventually got out to try and fight him. The second he got out of my car, I told my friend to get in. I locked the doors while the man followed him back to his Uber, threatening to punch him in the head. He got in his Uber and they drove away, and so did we, and the man was left standing in the road looking very angry. The next morning, I spoke to my mom, who was a prosecutor for 20 years. She told me that she tried a case where 2 girls my age gave a guy a ride home from the bar, and he raped and murdered both of them. I didn't go clubbing for a while after that. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough, but I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. There were never any issues, until one evening, when I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I heard a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, but there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the people, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Leave now or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I was freaking out. I called my landlord, who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come and check things out. I called the police and told them what was going on. They said a car was on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother made their way to the parking lot. I watched out my window and saw them approach him. The guy took one look at them and bolted. My landlord and his brother tried to chase him, but he got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrived. I gave my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stared at me and said, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who's been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I got a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the guy reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. This story happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and studying in Paris, France. I was going home from university. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day, I felt slightly uncomfortable. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time, his gaze felt beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him getting off the bus. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, a few meters behind. I walked into a shop, took my phone, and pretended to be taking a call. When I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back in the busy street. I zigzagged and crossed the street at every crossing. Finally, I believed that him getting off at the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one last time, and there he was. His alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through my door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up. I regretted it the moment I did. I could hear the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping someone would open, but now he knew my name. Gabrielle? I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen. Open the door, please, said a pleading voice. I just want to talk to you. Somehow I couldn't move or speak. Come to the window, he added. Look at me, you'll see. I'm not a bad guy. Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake. I hung up in shock. I waited by the door without moving for what seemed like hours. When I finally managed to calm myself down, I called my long-distance boyfriend. Call the police, he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today, it would be the first thing I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was. I called my best friend instead. I didn't want to feel alone. I told her all about it, and after a while I felt better, safe. We started laughing, then suddenly, the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home. I answered. Gabrielle, said the voice. Open, please. I still remember the chills I felt. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. Gabrielle, let me in. I'm so thirsty, he said. Just give me a glass of water. This broke the tension. I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in a recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared even to breathe. The intercom rang again, and again, and again, but I didn't answer this time. I crouched to the sofa and fell asleep in exhaustion. I heard the intercom ring one more time in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning, afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note in my mailbox. Gabrielle, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened up to me. We immediately went to the nearest police station. The police listened and of course told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install digicode on the building door the same day and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking them to not open the door to anyone they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with 2 friends every morning for more than a week. I never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I used a different route to and from university every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today, I am still very observant of my surroundings. I never answer the door if I am not expecting someone. For 6 months last year, I lived in the north of Spain. About a week before I was going to move back to Ireland, my friend and I were at my house having dinner and drinking a little. I was renting an apartment in the city, and my roommate was an older lady, maybe in her 50s. I'm 20. That night, my roommate left to go have dinner with her friends. About a minute after she left, someone buzzed our door to be let in the building. I looked at the camera and didn't recognize the woman. She looked to be in her late 20s to early 30s, so I just assumed it was one of my roommates and that she was coming to meet her. I buzzed her into the building, assuming they would meet in the lobby. At first, I didn't buzz her in because I didn't recognize her, and she walked away from the door. But then I hit the buzzer as soon as she walked away, and then I, myself, walked away from the camera, meaning I couldn't see if she actually entered or not, assuming that if she didn't enter, she would just call or text my roommate. Boy, was I wrong. This woman came up to my apartment building on the 6th floor. She came up just 2 minutes after my roommate left, so I know she didn't take the stairs, and I know they must have seen each other when my roommate got off the lift and the lady got on. Realizing that this was weird, I did not open the door when she rang it. I looked through the peephole just to confirm that it was nobody I knew. At this point, I backed away from the door and gestured for my friend to be silent. We crept back to my room, which was at the far side of the apartment. and I began calling my roommate who wasn't picking up. Meanwhile, the lady was incessantly ringing my door. My roommate was not picking up, and my friend was just telling me to open my door. In her mind, it was a woman, so she must be harmless, but I told her she was an idiot for underestimating the female sex. Women can be criminals too. She kept telling me to open the door and I refused. The door kept ringing, and I kept looking out at the people. At this point, I understood that if she knew my roommate or was looking for someone specific, she would just call or text them. She didn't take out her phone at all. She just stayed eerily silent, didn't call out any names or ask if anyone was home. This was weird to me. I finally got through to my roommate. She said she wasn't expecting anyone and that she doesn't know anyone in that age range. Now it would have been at least 20 minutes. I knew the lady knew someone was home because the lights were on, and my understanding is that's why she wasn't leaving. I continued watching her through the people and saw her go into the lift for a minute and then come back out again. The lift was really loud and I would hear it move. It didn't. She just went in and came out. In my mind, this meant someone in the lift was waiting for her. After about 40 minutes, the woman finally left. I ran to our hall and flicked on the outside camera. The lady left the building with 2 men. They all had backpacks on. I will be eternally grateful for trusting my instincts and not listening to my friend. Sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. This happened a few months ago in the McDonald's at Copenhagen Station. I am not Danish, only visiting the country for 1 day, and since I wanted to travel cheap, I decided to take the cheapest bus there, which just so happened to be the one arriving at 11 p.m. the day before. I thought I could save even more money by not renting a bed somewhere, and instead spending the night awake at the station, do my business the next day, and sleep long and well on the bus ride back home. So this McDonald's was open 24/7. I pretty early discovered that the station was too cold for me to get some shut-eye, so I went inside and bought a coffee and sat down at an empty table. Plenty of lighting and semi-drunk people to keep me awake, I thought. I should add that I'm 23 and a female. After some while of sitting in my spot, a strange guy walked over and placed a cup full of soda on my table. He said in Danish something that I believe meant, "I ate my food already. I didn't drink any. You should have it instead." I am Swedish, and although some Swedes understand Danish perfectly well, I have some difficulties doing so this was just a guess. Anyway, I didn't really pay much attention to the cup after it was put on my table, just wrote it off as a random drunk guy trying to flirt. But I noticed that in front of me a table away sat another guy, and he was watching me closely, because we locked eyes the times I would look up and peek at him. This creeped me out. I really didn't like being watched like this, and he just sat there for nearly an hour, even though he had no food in front of him. In the end, this dude stood up and walked over to me, and I cursed internally, thinking I'd have to defend myself and tell him to leave. But he turned, and there stood the guy that had left the soda cup on my table. He told the soda guy to leave, after pushing the soda cup back into his arms, and that he didn't want to see him anywhere near this place again. Then he turned to me and explained in English that the soda guy had walked by my table several times, glancing at me and the cup and probably waiting for me to drink it. He said he'd finished his meal a while ago and just stayed to watch over me, but had to leave and reminded me to be careful. I hadn't even noticed the soda guy supposedly pacing by. I was too fixated on this other dude, who just so happened to be the good guy watching over me. Who knows what was in that soda, and what would have happened if I had gotten really thirsty and drank some of it.